10 on YouTube.
Perfect.
And
Go ahead.
they'll start joining. They'll join. Some more will join now.
No worries. I
They'll
think
just
it's good to start. Yeah.
So for you all, please keep all the questions ready for the speaker, and Dr. Ammar will answer only during the Q&A session. Before we begin, let me just take a few minutes to introduce Dr. Ammar Raza, our today's speaker. Dr. Ammar is currently the Regional Medical Director, Allergan Aesthetics, AbbVie, Dubai. Mr. Ammar is well-accomplished physician and alumnus of Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. He comes with 20 plus years of experience in healthcare, and he has worked in diverse settings and major pharmaceutical companies such as AbbVie, Allergan, AstraZeneca, Novartis, Novo Nordisk, Dr. Reddy's, and pharmaceutical research and development companies, Strides, Arcolab, and Dr. Reddy's. He has a vast clinical experience in various clinical settings such as hospitals and office-based clinical diabetology practice. Dr. Ammar has contributed to clinical development and launch of many NCEs, NBEs, medical devices, branded generics, and biosimilars across emerging markets, including insulin analogs, a DPP inhibitor, SGL2 inhibitor, a GLP-1 analog, a novel antiplatelet agent, extended release beta blocker, antibiotics, vaccine, a combination inhaler for asthma and COPD, novel anemia drug for CKD patients, dermal filters, in addition to a biosimilar MAB and small molecules and supportive therapies in oncology. Dr. Ammar was awarded fellowship of the American College of Clinical Pharmacology, ACCP, in 2018. He got elected to the Executive Committee of South Asia chapter of ACCP. He currently serves on the Publication Committee of ACCP. He is a recipient of many industry and other awards, including Best Citizens of India 2016 award, Rajiv Gandhi Gold Medal Award 2018, IARDO Award for Contribution in Medical Science 2018, and industry awards. 2 awards for excellence in Allergan, MD's Circle of Excellence, AstraZeneca Global, and regional and country level awards. He serves on the editorial board of International Journal of Basic and Clinical Pharmacology and as honorary visiting faculty, National Institute of Pharmaceutical Education and Research, NIPER, Hyderabad. He is listed among Global Pharmaceutical Sciences Experts by OMIC Online org, and he is listed on the worldwide Who's Who registry for executives, professionals, and entrepreneurs. Dr. Ammar, I'm sorry I could not summarize your complete resume. With this short note, I now request Dr. Ammar to take over the session and walk us through today's topic, clinical research and medical affairs, an introduction to growing opportunities for pharmaceutical professionals. Over to you, Ammar sir.
Thank you, Manoj. Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here. With you all this afternoon, and also great to connect back with the roots, the people back home in India, and the pharmacy fraternity, so to say. And I see this as a great opportunity to be back doing so. Let me share my slides so that you can see. No. Give me a second, I'll just share my slides. Okay.
Yes, sir, please share, sir. I have stopped sharing from my end.
Yeah, but somehow I'm not able to find.
You're not able to do it?
No, my slides, I can't find them.
Okay, just
there are too many windows open, so let me close.
Okay,
them.
okay.
Okay. No. Sure, give me a second.
No
Okay.
problem, sir. No problem.
I've got it here. Okay. Can you see my slides?
No, sir. It shows the pictures folder.
Oh. I don't know what's happening. Okay. No. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you so much. Sorry for this glitch. So what I intend to do in the next 45 minutes or so, also giving some time for us to discuss some questions that you may have. Um, this is just a disclaimer from my end. I just want to make sure that everybody understands all these views and experience that I'm sharing is all my views as an individual, and has got nothing to do with my affiliation with my current or previous employers. And also that many of this information that I'm sharing is sort of proprietary to what my thoughts are. So with that, what I intend to do over the next 45 minutes is give you an overview of drug discovery and development, which I think is a very elaborate topic, which can be multiple sessions, but I'll just try and give you a very quick overview. I'll also try and give you an overview of basically clinical drug development, which is more around clinical trials. And then the interesting part, which you will be interested in, is to know what are the opportunities in this space of clinical research for pharmacy professionals. And then in the second part of the presentation, I intend to give you an overview of medical affairs, and then share some thoughts around how this function of medical affairs is evolving in the pharmaceutical rather the biopharmaceutical industry, and then give you some glimpse of what the opportunities are in medical affairs for pharmacy professionals. So without much ado, let me just start off by giving you a very quick overview of drug discovery process. So usually drug discovery is a very elaborate, prolonged process, expensive process. It starts off with the studies of disease mechanism, and then some molecular work, animal studies, followed by identifying a specific target that you want to really work upon, following which you start the lead search, which is through development of assays, and then it's a very iterative process. A lot of back and forth happens. There is usually a library of compounds which you go through, and then you do a lead optimization, which is basically to select a specific lead compound which could go into further development, which then goes into safety testing in animals, following which there are a series of human studies that are done starting from phase 1 to phase 3. And then if everything goes well through all of this process and the drug succeeds, which I will show some data on how successful or unsuccessful this process is. Many a times it is not. Things could drop off at any stage of this process, though it looks like one slide, but it takes a minimum of a decade, 10 years, more than $1 billion to produce a drug in this day and age. And the more biologics that are being developed, the more chances of not failures, but more chances of not getting an approval, because there is always a very high risk to this process. And when it comes to development, so that is the discovery and development together. But when you look at development, particularly, you assess basically safety, which is doing ADME studies, understanding the pharmacology, then refining the process in terms of R&D, and how you want the chemical structure and manufacturing to be sort of optimized, producing small batches of the medicine. You do a lot of formulation R&D, following which there is a whole process of planning and regulatory affairs, and all cross-functional teams get along here. Following which then you do a lot of coordination during the clinical development process to be able to gather data, analyze that data, statistically look at it, and then do the clinical development program, which is basically phase 1 to phase 3. So what's a clinical trial? It's an investigation in human subjects, which is intended to discover or verify the clinical, pharmacological, or other pharmacodynamic effects of an investigational drug. And here we are also not only looking at efficacy, but also looking at safety, which means you look at adverse events. You're looking at pharmacology. How does it get absorbed? How does it get distributed? How does it get metabolized and then excreted from the body as well? Typically, clinical trial and clinical study are used synonymously, though the appropriate term will be a clinical trial, because you're trying a drug and testing the effects of that drug, both the efficacy and the safety, as I pointed out earlier on. Now, when these drugs are developed, the process of clinical trials is usually in 3 phases: pre-approval, and then post-approval, there's a phase 4 study, which I will show in a minute. So whenever there is a new chemical entity that is identified, or an IND is filed, you kickstart a phase 1 program. The phase 1 study is typically a safety study. A phase 2 study is a safety plus dose ranging sort of study. And phase 3 is in a wider population, multi-site, where you want to understand both the efficacy and safety in the targeted indication, which is phase 3 program, following which, if everything goes well, you could get approval. And post-approval, the process of collecting data continues, which is what is sometimes called as post-marketing surveillance, PMS, phase 4, or just safety surveillance and so on, which could be in the real world and could give a lot more insights than in the controlled settings that you did trials in the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I've intentionally on this slide also shown you these different sizes of boxes, because that's the population of people that will get involved. So in phase 1, it's a very small number of people. In phase 2, the number of patients who get involved usually would increase, and then phase 3 would be much larger. And one other thing that I also want to point out is that over the years, let's say if I look back at my own journey, and 20 years ago when I started in the industry, at approval, we may have at best data in 5,000 to 6,000 patients. But now if you see most recently approved drugs, the data may be available in more than 2 times that number, easily 10,000 patients, 15,000 patients. And if I take specifically example of either a cardiovascular drug or an anti-diabetic drug, which I have done work in those areas the most, you will see that there are the one single trial, which could be a cardiovascular outcome trial, what we call as the CWAT, which is a phase 3B study, could involve as many as 15,000 to 20,000 patients. One trial I'm talking about. So that's the magnitude, and that's the transition the industry has gone through. So the requirements of this clinical trial data from the regulators end has really evolved over the years. So what you could do with just 2,000 to 3,000 patients initially, then maybe in the 2010 time, it was like around 5,000 patients. Now we are looking at something like more than 10 or 15,000 patients data at approval that you have. And obviously it depends on which therapy area you're talking about, but I'm just kind of giving a general overview of what I've seen. And usually the phase 1 study is in healthy volunteers. Rarely it could be in patients. I was involved in one phase 1 study, which was in patients, in diabetic patients, but that's not all the times. It's maybe in specific settings, and maybe in oncology, maybe in a specific study, which will not be the first in man study, but it could be a subsequent phase 1, which is basically to look at either a multiple ascending dose or something of that kind. So the idea of phase 1 is basically to look at, does the drug really work, and is it safe, and how does it really behave in human beings? This is the first time you're exposing human beings to the drug, so you need to really be very careful, take a very small population, typically healthy volunteers, do a quick study, understand the pharmacology, and then move on to a phase 2 when you got confidence that it works. It is not showing anything drastic in terms of safety concerns. You take this up for phase 2, which is usually a randomized controlled trial, maybe blinded. Often it is with patients. Rarely there are phase 2s with volunteers, so most of the times it is patients. And here you're also looking at, does the drug really work? And what's the efficacy of the drug in a smaller population? So relative to phase 3, phase 2 is a smaller population. Remember the chart that I showed in the previous slide. And then phase 3 is when you actually want to look at the targeted indication in a wider population in using randomized control trial design. And it could last several years. It could, and this is the most expensive part of the drug development program, where you end up spending a lot of money, because these phase 3 studies are typically multi-centric, multinational studies, which means that the sites could be spread across US, Europe, Asia, Latin America, whatever else. Yeah, so it could be very widely spread, which could mean that it could add to a lot of cost. It would also add to a lot of complexity in the conduct of these trials. Here, once you get phase 3 data, you have established the safety as well as the efficacy of the drug in a large patient group in the targeted indication. Let's say it's type 2 diabetes, you have identified that, or it is let's say acute coronary syndrome, you have done that in that particular patient population. So just to elaborate a little bit, I'll not go through a lot, but basically phase 1 studies are usually involving not large number of people, 30 to 50 normal healthy volunteers, sometimes patients, as I said, usually looking at the distribution of the drug, the metabolism and excretion. And then in phase 2, you're basically, is the first look at efficacy. You could also do dose ranging studies, and following phase 2 is when, at the end of phase 2 is when you really take a decision of to go or not to go, meaning that to proceed further or not to proceed further. And then in the phase, if the decision is to go ahead, then you design a large randomized controlled trial. It could be 1 or 2 pivotal studies, and depending on the therapy area and the requirement of the regulator. Number of patients could range anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000. As I said, it could be even much larger. It may take a number of years. And here's some glimpse of what it looks like currently. And what I have also shown you here is how many compounds, for example, if you take one compound and then move it to phase 1, the chances of failure is about 30%. So only 70% get into phase 1 from preclinical studies. And then that drops to 33% by the time you get into phase 2. So you're half. And then further in phase 3, you could also have failures where there are compounds which I have been part of development of compounds which got approved by one regulator, for example, the European regulator, and the US FDA rejected it. And the company then took a call to pull that compound out. So there are several examples where even in phase 3, compounds have just gone out of the wind. And you can imagine the loss that the company would have sort of incurred through this whole process, because you have spent a lot of money, effort, and time, but the drug doesn't see the light of the day. So the whole message that I want to give you is that this whole process is expensive, it is complex, it is costly, and it could result in a good outcome or sometimes in a not so good outcome. The phase 1 compound that I was talking about, that I was involved in patients with diabetes, actually dropped off in phase 2. So you can imagine. So phase 2, it just fell off, and we did not further pursue that particular concept, which is a very novel concept. But there were safety concerns. There were also some efficacy concerns, so it just kind of fell off. Many a times it is safety reasons for which drugs are also pulled out, withdrawn. Even after approval, they are sort of pulled out. And I'm sure many of you are aware of some of the drugs that we know popularly that have been pulled out, whether it is coxibs or it is some statins and other drugs as well. But however, this whole process is a pretty robust process. It is a time-consuming process. As I said, it could take more than a decade, and it could cost millions of dollars. Over $1 billion is what is estimated as of today. Now, moving to the part where you may be thinking, why am I talking about all of this? Because I wanted to give you an overview so that you understand that if you want to pursue a career in clinical research, which some of you may be interested in doing so, and what are the opportunities? So there are 2 sets of opportunities. One is with a clinical research organization, what you call as a CRO. The likes of IQVIA, Covance, to Parexel, to whatever else, Syneos, and so on. So you could list several CROs that you could think of, PRA and whatnot. So several CROs that could offer your position. Typically, the starting role is a clinical research associate for clinical trials, which then you could grow into as a clinical trial manager or a project manager. There could be some opportunities in regulatory affairs as well. And then there could be an opportunity to work at the site where the trial is conducted, which is called as a CRC, or a clinical research coordinator role. And also in the CRO, there could be a role of a clinical quality manager as well. Now, there is another set of CROs which we typically only deal with what we call as bio equivalent studies. Now, these BABE study CROs, the likes of VIDA, Lambda, and a few others that I could go on naming, but these are the ones where you could have specific roles for pharmacists, which is one, as a pharmacist itself, to manage the pharmacy where the drug is sort of stored, dispensed, accounted for, because this is a very stringent process, very SOP driven, and somebody needs to really monitor that and keep a close watch. So I'm not talking about a pharmacist as in sitting in a counter and selling medicines, but this is a pharmacist who is actually managing clinical supplies for a BABE study. Or it could be a QC or a QA person who is looking at collecting data. Somebody who is more senior could be looking at how is the data being collected, how is it being captured, and so on and so forth, checks all of those pieces. And then there could also be affiliated roles in pharmacovigilance, regulatory affairs, or medical writing within these CRO industries. Now, coming to the pharmaceutical industry, which is the biopharm companies, here typically the trials are designed globally, because I'm talking about multinational companies, they're designed globally. So the execution happens at the country level. So where you have CRAs, project leads, team leads, clinical trial managers, and project managers. Now, there could be another scenario where there could be domestic companies which may be designing trials and executing them, both at a local level, which is, let's say, in the country. Like the likes of Sun Pharma, Cipla, Glenmark, just to name a few, Lupin, so on, may have then much more elaborate teams, which could range from CRAs all the way to, clinical research directors and several people playing different roles that I listed around both clinical operations itself, which is one core part, but it could also be clinical data, and could also be coding, medical coding, could also be somebody in doing pharmacovigilance and doing some amount of drug safety monitoring. So it could be the whole scheme of things at a pharmaceutical company, which is a domestic pharmaceutical company, as I gave you some examples of. Okay. With that, let me switch gears to another interesting topic, a topic which is very obviously, all of these topics are very close to my heart, and I just want to quickly give you an overview. Now, what the medical affairs function is the function that is supposed to get the right evidence to the right stakeholder and make sure that the right drug is administered in the right dose to the right patient, so that you get the best possible clinical outcome. And typically, medical affairs is a bridge between the R&D organization on one hand and the commercial organization on the other hand. The R&D organization which is actually discovering these medicines, doing all the pre-work before it gets launched. And then the commercial organization which actually is generating revenue from this drug, right? So between these two, the medical affairs has a very critical role to play, the role of a bridge. And this role has evolved over the years because of the increasing complexity of the healthcare environment. The role has become far more richer, more sort of important, more critical, and you will also see there is a McKinsey Vision 2025 document, I guess, which calls medical affairs as the third pillar. Means there is a R&D organization, which is pillar 1, commercial organization, which is pillar 2, and medical affairs as pillar 3. Okay, so that's the evolving and important role of medical affairs. Now, what does medical affairs do, and who are the people? Typically, the roles are that of a medical advisor, medical science liaison, so on and so forth. Now, one of the key responsibilities of medical affairs is to be the patient's voice, because the pharmaceutical industry is moving towards patient centricity. So keep the patient at the heart of everything you do, which means medical affairs has to own that voice of the patient and keep that clinical outcome, the data, the dissemination of data to identify the needs for generation of more data and so on. So what activities does medical affairs do? This is just an overview, okay? May not be very comprehensive, but just to give you an idea, to conduct advisory boards, to support the brand and therapeutic area strategy and its communication, to do physician education, to support regulatory affairs in the pre-launch phase. For example, in India, there is a process of a subject expert committee, which means now medical affairs could go and present this data. I have done that several times to get a product approved, or to get an additional indication approved, or to get a protocol for a clinical trial approved. Then training of internal teams, both sales and marketing teams. Medical compliance is another important part. Then there are the other parts which are on the right side of the slide, where there's a critical need of identifying data gaps and thereby seeing how can you generate that data. Can you do a phase 4 study? Do you need to do a PMS study, or do you just need a small study to understand and gather insights? Publications. Also work with affiliate functions like pharmacovigilance, medical information, clinical operations. The other thing which is now happening, and this is a new sort of addition that is coming in, is to work with patient organizations and advocacy groups. That's another role of medical affairs. As I said, keeping the patient at the heart of everything that you do. And when I talk about data generation, I'm also referring to studies which are investigator initiated, not necessarily done by the company, but medical affairs is the sort of gatekeeper looking at whether there is need for generation of such data, and is that valuable? What is it going to deliver, and should the company therefore fund that particular investigator initiated study? The last part which I've not highlighted here is insight gathering. So every conversation that medical affairs has with different stakeholders, whether it is regulators, payers, or physicians, or patient groups, all of it then is fed back into the R&D organization or into the commercial organization, so that the company can accordingly realign or refine the strategy for the launch of the product. So the medical affairs organization therefore plays a very critical role in terms of working with several stakeholders within the company, which is sales, marketing, legal compliance, regulatory, patient safety, clinical development, and then other functions like market access, health outcomes, research, market research, and so on, which is the key internal stakeholders. That's not it all. There's a big bunch of external stakeholders where medical affairs takes responsibility of developing scientific relationships with KOLs, therapy area leaders, and medical societies, which is again becoming extremely critical, where partnering with the society. For example, let me just give you an example so that you can relate. Let's say the RSSDI, which is the Research Society for Study of Diabetes in India, or the CSI, the Cardiological Society of India, or the GSI, which is the Gastroenterology Society of India. Now that medical affairs plays a very critical role to be able to establish that very strong partnership with societies, so that there is wider dissemination of data. There is partnership to look at generation of data needs, generation of consensus, generation of some kind of guideline documents, and so on and so forth, which could be extremely valuable in this day and age. And then working also closely with payers, with regulators, which could be regulatory authority officials, Ministry of Health officials, for example, in this part of the world where I am currently, it's the Ministry of Health officials, then patients and patient organizations, as I pointed out earlier on. So though this is not a very comprehensive list, but this just gives you an overview of what does the role sort of involve of medical affairs. Now, the critical one is obviously the societies and the physicians. That's the most important, and that is why I've sort of highlighted that on the slide. Moving forwards, the role of medical affairs, as I said, has been evolving, and has evolved because of the need that arises because of the changing healthcare landscape. The environment externally is changing very, very rapidly, and all of you can relate. For example, the environment of healthcare has completely changed with the pandemic. The pandemic itself has brought in a lot of change. And that change is in several ways the way patient and physicians interact, the expectations of the patients have changed, and the way also the pharmaceutical company interacts with the physicians. And what kind of activities we do. How do we do all of the activities that I talked about? Advisory board, for example, it's no longer a face-to-face ad board. It is a virtual meeting. Now, how do you do that? What's the way and then the environment externally, with the emergence of, let's say, tertiary care hospitals in India, which is a large number of hospitals, which are corporate hospitals, for example. Now, how do you deal with them? It's different from dealing with a physician who is like a single owner clinic physician who's in a clinic versus somebody who's running a polyclinic versus somebody who's running a nursing home versus somebody who is part of a large tertiary care chain of hospitals, let's say Apollo or Fortis or whatever else, right? So that whole environment has changed. The expectations of the governments have changed in terms of pricing, in terms of how soon. Let me give you a perspective. Now, here, when I started in the industry, if a drug was approved in the United States by the US FDA, it may take easily about a decade or a decade and a half for the drug to be launched in India. Okay, same drug, I'm talking about the original drug. And certain drugs never got launched, for example. Yeah, there are several examples of the famous largest molecule that was sold was a statin, which was a Pfizer drug, and it never got introduced in India. There were generics, but the original one did not come to India. But that was almost about a decade and a half ago. Now, in the last decade, from 2010 or whatever else onwards, you will see that has changed. Now, a drug is introduced in the US. I have had opportunities where within 3 years, we have brought the drug into India. Within 3 years. And this is original compound I'm talking about. Whether you take an SGLT2 inhibitor, you go and look at canagliflozin or empagliflozin or dapagliflozin, which I happened to work on, or you look at any gliptin, all of those came within a short span of time. So that window is narrowing. But then there is also a huge challenge where the price in the US is not the same as the price in India. Yeah, because here it's out of pocket versus the environment in the US it is insurance. In some other countries, it is government paying. For example, here in Middle East, it's majorly government who is paying for healthcare. Now, in our part of the world, in India, it is not so. You pay out of the pocket. So how many percentage of people are insured? Very small percent. So how do you then work around the pricing, access, making sure patients get access to this drug? Or while the drug is still under development, the phase 2 data is so promising for an oncology drug, you could provide early access because there's a big unmet need and patients need it. And I can give you multiple examples. Patients need it, but then you can't introduce the drug immediately because phase 3 is still on. But you could do an early access program. Who drives that early access program? It has to be medical affairs. It cannot be proactive, but it can be reactive. How can you do that? In oncology, particularly, in hematology, in rare diseases, there is that big role that medical affairs plays in terms of early access or post-trial access, because you do phase 3, your drug is still under evaluation by the authorities, but there is so much promise in the drug and need for the drug that you could bring it and use it in a small population of patients, need-based, on the recommendation of the physician who is treating the condition. So again, it applies largely in those areas that I talked about, oncology and so on. So the changes are primarily driven by the need to be basing decisions which are very transparent, which are data-based, data related. So there is so much data that is being generated. As we speak, we are generating so much of data, right? And in this era of Internet of Things, evolving technology, you're generating so much data. And that data could be utilized by the pharmaceutical industry, by the physicians to make very informed decisions. And this also empowers patients to be involved in the decision-making process, which is the third part that I've highlighted. Now, I have some articles that I've written on these areas. I've given links if you're interested, which is around patient centricity, which is around technology and so on. So what has happened is medical affairs, which typically used to be a very reactive function, which means that if there is a question from a physician, somebody has to respond. So who does it? Medical affairs does it. That's a reactive role, which is purely a medical information service role in the past. But now that has transformed into a very proactive role, as I said, of working with physicians, working with societies, generating data, communicating data, training people internally, externally, proactively taking steps to educate physicians and so on and so forth, which is a very proactive approach. And this transformation has happened relatively quickly. There was a very interesting survey that was done in India, which I've not shown here, but I happened to see it, was that more than 85% of domestic companies in India have a full-fledged medical affairs department. I'm talking about domestic companies, not talking about multinational companies, which is coming from the days when I started off. Many Indian companies never had a medical affairs function, or they had some consultant who would be like one person going to 4 companies and just approving some material, providing some responses to questions and so on and so forth. It did not involve a whole organization to be put together. And the size of the organization as well, when I started off, if medical affairs were like 8 people, 6 people, now it is 40 people. Can you imagine? I have managed a team which was 25 people in medical affairs function, which is very large, right? And there are companies which are like 40, 50 people that are being put together for medical affairs alone in India, I'm talking about. So that's, look at Novartis, for example, as a size of their medical affairs function is very large. The tiers are so many, in the hierarchy. So it's a very evolving function. And the core skills that are needed for a medical affairs personnel is scientific knowledge, communication skills, very strong business acumen, not just understanding science, but also being able to relate that science to business and to be able to articulate that information that is available, which may be widely available. It's all there on the internet, but then can you articulate that in the most effective way, in the most impactful way, so that you improve patient outcomes? And then there's a high need for being patient-centric, drive to make a difference, creativity, innovation, strategic thinking, and then for more senior roles, of course, people management, which is both people as in internally as well as people externally. As I said, several stakeholders that you manage. So what are the possible career opportunities for pharmacists? Now, these are limited. Now, I want to be very clear here, and I just want to put this fact on the table so that people don't go back with a wrong perception. Yeah. So most of the medical affairs people in India, the requirement is to have a medical doctor. Okay. And many companies insist on an MD in clinical pharmacology, not just MBBS. Okay. That's the first part. But in several other parts of the world, including where I am based in Middle East, half of my team is pharmacists. Okay. But that means it needs a very different level of skills and a different level approach to it. Typically, what happens is in Middle East, people who are pharmacists join sales, join as a sales rep, medical representative, and then they work sometime different companies. Then they demonstrate their ability and their acumen for science. They demonstrate that in multiple ways, and then they find a way into medical affairs as an MSL, and then, of course, grow up the ladder. Whereas in India, very few companies are open to recruit PharmDs or MPharms as MSLs. And one example that I can always think of and I can quote is Novartis. Because of their large size of medical organization, they don't insist on MSLs being doctors all the times. They even are open, as I said, the same model that I talked of. You joined as a sales rep, and then you transition into medical affairs like you transition into marketing or any other function. The other roles which are typically there, which I have myself recruited for, is medical information people, MPharms or PharmDs as medical information associates or executives. And then there are smaller Indian companies which may be not having that elaborate organization that I talked of, 25 people, 40 people, but maybe having 3 people. In that situation, they may recruit an MPharm or a PharmD as a medical affairs executive who does all the back-end work and does a lot of data literature search, data crunching, putting some, looking at claims, labels, and then, reviewing promotional material, so on and so forth, which is one part. There could also be opportunities within training. There are some companies which are looking at medical trainers, but it's hard for them to put their, how should I say, more highly paid medical physicians to be doing this. They may look at somebody who's coming from a pharmacy background. I'm not kind of anywhere differentiating, so please don't get me wrong on that front, but I'm placing the reality on the table so that you get a actual perspective. As I said, in many parts of the world, including Europe, US, many MSLs are pharmacists. Even in Middle East, that's the trend. But in India, it somehow remains to be doctors and primarily MDs in clinical pharmacology. If you see any medical advisor role, and I can give you a recent example. This was like 1.5 months ago. I had someone who was like an experienced MSL in a multinational company. And somebody asked me, Dr. Ammar, do you have someone whom you can recommend? And this was a friend. And I sent two CVs, okay, one of an MD pharmacology and the other. And then immediately the response was, no, I think I'll go with the MD pharmacology. I don't think I'll be able to, sort of. So that's the kind of, and I've got this responses even within my organization. When I say India medical director, my friend, can I recommend some CVs you're recruiting? He says, Doc, can you please send me somebody with an MD? Because that's the requirement that the organization has put. So it's just that requirement that has come up, but this could change in the coming years. And I see a big possibility and opportunity, particularly for people who have done PharmD, because in India, I believe PharmD is relatively new. The first batch, I think, was started sometime in 2009 or 10. And I remember this was started in JSS. I recommended a few people to do this course, and they are doing well, which I'm glad about. One of them is actually a sales rep here in Dubai. The first batch of PharmD is from JSS. So that could be a possibility, that PharmDs could change this scenario. Because if you bring that right amount of skill and the knowledge and the capabilities, then you will potentially arrive. And that brings me to what I believe you should look at. Anytime when you look at a career, I think Steve Jobs, whom you will all relate to, all the Apple phones in your hand are related to this individual, which is Steve Jobs. He says the only way to do great work is to love what you do. So the first thing is do what you love or love what you do. If you haven't found it, keep looking for it. Don't settle, is what he says, because that's what he describes. If you look at his 3 stories on YouTube, you'll find that. The other bit that I want to also advise very sincerely to people here, and I hope you don't mind doing me doing that, is do what you love, but don't go after money. Okay, money will follow. It's a given that money will follow. Okay, start thinking of what you want to do, which direction do you want to head. Do you love doing that? Explore it, do it, figure it out, and then as you grow, you will get, things will follow, success will follow, money will follow, and so on and so forth. The other thing which I also wanted to make it a bit more close on a more lighter note, because I guess I made it a bit heavy, is that sometimes, you see an example here. I feel that I have the worst job in the world, but you haven't seen the worst. Yeah? You have the other side, which is much worse. So always the other side is always green. Sorry, the other side is always green. It looks lush green. Don't compare yourself. Okay, you are what you are. Okay, pursue excellence and you will succeed in whatever field, whatever area that you may be working in, whatever domain or function you may be working. The other bit, which is also hilarious, is this thing, which I found very recently, and some of you might have seen this already, is that, what are you doing? When you do something, a lot of people may not understand it, including your family, your friends, and your, several people may have different perceptions of what you're doing. But what matters is what you actually are doing, and therefore, are you loving what you're doing? And if you are loving what you're doing, or if you don't love what you're doing, then find something what you love to do, and that will bring all the success that you want in life, right? With that, let me thank you for your attention, and thanks for the opportunity. Obviously, I'll be more than happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, sir. Please stop sharing the slides, sir.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Ammar, for walking us through the overview of clinical trials and medical affairs. I'm sure, around 50 people who are still there, they would have got some insights on, and new perspectives on clinical trials and medical affairs. Patient centricity is regarded as one of the most important driving force for many pharmaceutical companies to plan their entire product folio these days. And medical affairs and pharmacy professionals for sure could play a very important role in these aspects. Just a few days back, the Pharmacy Council of India issued a gazette notification wherein they have given a specific job post for the pharmacy professionals as clinical pharmacists. This is a very big development ever since the start of PharmD professionals some 11 years back. The degree was started some 11 years back, but only after 11 years they could realize the importance and potential of PharmDs. And with this gadget notification, the PharmDs could get a very, very good recognition in overall healthcare system. The pharmaceutical organizations are now going for these people because they have good experience for both medicine and drugs. So I'm sure with this the PharmDs and specifically MPharm clinical pharmacy professionals would play a key role in clinical research and medical affairs. So thank you so much, Dr. Ammar, for your insightful presentation. And I request now my audience, please, if you have any questions, you could just unmute yourself and ask. I have already given you the unmuting right. And then we can just do it for next 15-20 minutes.
Manoj, one comment from my end on the PharmD's note. I think
Please, sir.
I don't know if I highlighted this.
Yes.
I know of many pharmaceutical companies, multinationals, who are looking for CRAs, for example.
Yes, sir.
Research associates, and they are specifically looking for PharmDs. Specifically, yeah.
Yes, sir.
They're calling that out, which is a very positive thing that is happening. And the second thing, which to your point of clinical pharmacists, I think typically, for whatever reasons, in the past, the role of pharmacist in India was like just to cut the tablet and give it to the patient.
Yes.
But it has to move to wherein you say, if you take this tablet, how do you take it? What's the mode of administration? You take it with water, with warm water, without juice, with milk, whatever X, Y, Z, the mode of administration. How many times you take, frequency, dosing. That's an important advice. Third, what side effects to expect? Common ones, the common side effects. These 3 or 4 things, a pharmacist could really, play a role in patient care by directly influencing the patient and educating the patient beforehand and making sure that there are no medication errors, because it's a big issue, and there are no, and thereby driving a important clinical outcome, which everybody is looking for. Right, by giving that particular medicine or taking that particular medicine from a
absolutely
patient.
Sir, absolutely. The pharmacist could definitely play a key role in improving overall patient compliance and adherence, and a pharmacist being the first point of contact in India specifically. Whenever a patient wants to contact a healthcare professional, the pharmacist is the first point of contact always. So there, the role of pharmacist is even more important compared to any other place. And I'm sure that with this gadget notification, a lot more has to change now. So few people have raised their hands. Soham, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. I am a student of Bachelor of Pharmacy last year in LM College of Pharmacy. Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful speech on clinical research and medical writing and others. So my question was actually recently PCI has passed the gazette on clinical the need of requirement of clinical pharmacists in India, and we are seeing that things are changing in terms of clinical research and all. Like if we talk about TCM and other things, So, do you think there is a future, like how long it will take for our country to acquire the whole full-fledged system which is there in other countries like US, Canada, etc.?
So, I think it's a very good question, interesting one. Obviously, predicting time is like hard, I would say, but however, I think the most important thing for me is that we are taking the steps in the right direction. And this is making us go on that path, which I think other countries in the West took several years ago, and which I believe is extremely positive at this point in time, because we are heading in the right direction. And with these kind of policy changes that will happen over the years, and to that extent also, I believe that the pandemic has had one positive effect. And that positive effect that I see is in terms of recognizing the whole industry of pharmaceuticals, clinical research, and so on. So today, you will see even a layman saying that vaccine, I believe, is in phase 2, and this vaccine is in phase 3. I believe phase 3 data is completed. Now it will get approved. So people do understand now. The public, which was like very averse to, they always felt that they're being sort of used as guinea pigs. Today there is a complete change in perception, and the difference that the vaccine is making and will make in the years to come will also put the industry at a very different level overall. And therefore, I believe, given the pandemic and all of these the policy changes that we talked about, I think we are on the right path, and we should be getting there sooner than later, and which I think we should all view it positively and leverage it also positively.
Thank you for answering that, sir. Dr. Harikiran, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Amma. Good afternoon. So this is Dr. Hari, working as an CRA at Novo Nordisk. So family graduate. So before this session was scheduled, so I've gone through your LinkedIn profile. So I have seen that you have also worked at Novo Nordisk as a medical advisor. So that's great, and I'm happy for that. So my question was, so while going through your profile, I have noticed that you have done your executive program for IIM Bangalore. So from couple of months, I've been just looking to people who have done their executive programs from IIM or else ISB. It might be any other top B schools in India. So I just gone through your profile, so it was amazing. So basically, my question was, so if you see the MBA, so for the as a healthcare or else medical affairs or else clinical trials is a niche department. So what is the basic need for MBA for our people, and how, if I'm into clinical trials, how the MBA degree would be helpful? And before, if you're planning for an MBA degree, what were the pre sets of skills required? Because it's completely, we are into complete niche department, and completely when it comes to MBA, it is a huge one. It's not regarding one specific subject, so it's a huge one. So what are the set of qualifications or skills do we exactly need? Thank you.
So yeah, good question, Dr. Hari. I think you brought in a very, very important element, and now I believe that anybody in the pharmaceutical industry, anyone I'm saying, irrespective of the function, medical affairs, clinical development, or anyone, it's always a positive to have an MBA. Why do I say so? Because remember, MBA teaches you concepts. MBA is not about mastering a subject, right? It is about management. It's about understanding business, which is critical at any point in time. Because even if a pharmaceutical company is taking a decision to go with a product into phase 1, or moving a phase 1 to phase 2, or moving from phase 2 to phase 3, any of these decisions, or you're working with people who are like, at the end of the day, human beings, right? They bring their different sets of skills. How do you manage them? How do you manage a KOL? How do you manage a regulator? How do you manage a payer? All of these elements need you to be a good manager at the end of the day. And to be a good manager, it's always good to go through a formal program which can give you concepts. Not, as I said, it will not give you a whole bunch of domain expertise, but you will get a view. And let me give you an example so that you understand. Now, before my MBA, when I sat in any business review and somebody said CAGR, okay, I was like, scratching my head. What does this really mean? And you know how medical people are, and I'll just be very, very honest. And you come with a chip on the shoulder, so you feel a bit embarrassed to ask, what does that CAGR mean? What's the full form? What does it mean? Because you feel I know everything. I'm a doctor. I've spent 5 years in a medical school, 3 years after that post graduation. Blah 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 blah. So you feel that, right? Just making it a bit light. Now, when I did the MBA, I understand. Now today, if somebody tells me recruit someone, I have a vacancy, I need to recruit a medical advisor. Now for that, there is comp and ben. So what is comp and ben? You don't really understand. If you have done an MBA, you understand this is about compensation, this is about benchmarking, this is about benefits, and then a salary has so many components, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. So every financial data, every place where you're interacting with human beings and you're kind of managing expectations, I think even clinicians to that effect. I know several clinician friends of mine who have done an MBA, and that comes handy because at the end of the day, you're managing, right? You're managing a practice, you're managing a clinic, you're managing patients. So it's good to have those management concepts. Now, what do I think about? Should this MBA be right away? I would say no. Typically, I would say spend a few years, get hands-on experience in the industry, do an MBA, which is again very practical, not for the sake of MBA. And I'll give you a quick story here. Now, when I was thinking of MBA, and this was like 10, 15 years ago, over 3 years, I think I accumulated in my house a box full of prospectuses. Okay. I wrote to every possible university that I saw there was an MBA, and I wrote to them. I got all of those prospectus and I kind of, compiled them. But what was the use of that? Nothing, actually. I was not sure what I really wanted to pursue. Okay. And it so happens, in my case specifically, was that one day I was having a conversation with my wife, and she was saying, why do you get this so many, prospectus every time are you applying for all of these courses? I said, no, I'm not. And she said, why do you want to do all of these, small, chotu motu universities? Go with something which is the best in management. And can you look at IIM? And then that struck me, and it so happened that I had a patient who used to work in IIM. I told her, she got the form to my clinic, and late night, I remember I filled it and I went on a tour. And then she called me later saying, Dr. Ammar, I need this detail, that detail, and we filled all the details. And they wanted experience for this executive program, by the way. So I had to show that I had worked for so many years in the industry, and then got in, and it was it changed my perspective of business. As I said, business acumen is one of the things, and it's not specific to just medical affairs. It could be clinical research, it could be pharmacovigilance. In every domain that you can think of, if you do an MBA, you get a perspective on how to manage and how to look at things at a much broader level than just being focused. And the more senior you grow within an organization, you will need an MBA. It's a given. As a medical director, I cannot manage different stakeholders, including general managers in 5 countries without having an MBA, because that gives me a little bit of, leeway on how to kind of look at concepts and adapt those concepts, apply those concepts in day to day. Yeah, so don't do it for the fancy of it. Do it really, do it after a few years, and do it from a good institution. I think these are my 3 takeaway messages.
Thanks a lot. Dr. Amas, to follow-up question for that. So I've seen a couple of profiles of most of the top leaders into clinical trials, but if I see the managers or else the top people in the same organization, like sponsor companies or else the CRO companies. So most of the organizations are headed by the people from the product management or else the sales and marketing. But I have seen people rare from the medical, like the clinical trials people or else medical affairs people leading the organizations. So what is your comment on this?
Good question. Again, very intelligent one. That's changing, my friend. Okay, and I'll give you only one example which really excited me. Okay, I felt that the day that was announced, I think it was in 2018, if I'm not wrong, Vas Narasimhan. I don't know how many of you have heard of him. He's the CEO of
Novartis.
Novartis. Yeah, he's a physician. He's a guy who was heading the R&D of Novartis, and then went on to head one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, right? And that's changing. So if you today go and look at, there must be easily, this is my gut, and I'm talking about top pharmas, top 50 pharmas in the world. There must be easily about 5 to 6 of them who are physicians by training. Okay, which is good. I'm not just saying that it is changing. It is changing, and at the end of the day, also remember, I think this is important also for me to highlight. At the end of the day, remember that at some point in your career, qualifications don't matter. Okay, what matters is what do you bring to the table in terms of your skills, in terms of your attitude, in terms of your ability. I think that's what really matters. Because knowledge can be acquired. I do this. I always say this. I use the synonym always of ask. It's attitude, skills, and knowledge. If you have the right attitude, you can acquire skills and you can acquire knowledge. Right? Therefore, building that attitude, having the right attitude, and having the right basic skills, fundamental skills like communication, presentation, all of these basic skills, and then your clinical skills and everything will be extremely important. So at some point, these things don't really matter. What really matters is what you bring. Okay, so somebody who may be having he may be a fantastic R&D guy, but may not be great at management. He may be a pure scientist. There are people whom I know, they've been like lab scientists for years, 3 decades, and then they retire as a lab scientist because they're great at that, but they've not been able to evolve with time. But if you get a greater understanding of how you look at things in a much wider perspective than just that lab or that experiment, that's when you break it. You break it into the league in a way, so to say. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Ammar, for that answer. Professor Gyanachandran, you have raised your hand. You want to ask some question? Professor Gyanachandran, you're there? Okay, I think he's not there.
I'm available. Manoj.
Yes, sir.
I am available.
Okay.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I could just join about 20-30 minutes before about the presentation by Dr. Ammar Raza. I am not going to ask any question to Dr. Ammar Raza. Particularly, I would just want to add few points to our Dr. Ammar Raza's presentation. With my experience in clinical community pharmacy, pharmacists now it is coming in the limelight in the medical profession. Doctors have started recognizing the values and importance of pharmacy. We used to say that the diagnosis of disease is done by doctors, whereas disease is by giving a best quality of medicines from the pharmacist. This is role by pharmacists, and pharmacies, as you know, there are many countries they have manufacturing pharmacies, quality control pharmacies, clinical pharmacies, marketing pharmacists, marketing a pharmaceutical where we can deliver. I just come to one area, clinical pharmacist. Wherein see the clinical, as rightly told by Dr. Ammar Raza. For example, nowadays this pandemic, corona is going on. There are so many drugs. They are giving a drug, error and trend error method like doxycycline, azithromycin. Actually, doctors say take one tablet, OD for azithromycin, and they say doxycycline take one capsule morning night. As a clinical pharmacist, you can assist Dr. Azithromycin, the patient take after food. Actually, that medicine has to take before food. Because the medicine, when you take after food, that will be food interaction and absorption will be less. When you take azithromycin before the food, this message can be communicated to the patient through the doctors. So when the pharmacist goes along with the doctors, he can guide the doctors. Doctors will give the importance where this is a man having knowledge. So many things they know basically, as rightly told by Dr. Ammar Raza. Doctors, they think they are big. Of course, we do not deny, but we are also part of the healthcare team. We are also part of the healthcare team. We can join hands together because, as rightly said, patient is the center point. In any hospital setup, the patient is the center point, and we work as together. And the days are coming. And in India, the scenes are slowly changing. And private hospitals are appointing pharmacy students as a clinical pharmacists. And slowly, days are not far away. Even government colleges, they will open pharmacy programs, and the government also will start recruiting clinical pharmacists as in other countries. This is my few points, my dear Manoj Kumar, and I think our resource person will agree with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. I think all of them are extremely valuable. As I said, I believe that healthcare is a teamwork. From the time that the drug is discovered to its administration in the patient and producing the necessary effect, improving patient outcome, throughout this journey, there are different people involved in different parts, and each one plays an extremely critical role. So there is no way we can undermine anybody's role. And all that we have to do now, I think, is strengthen that role. What we are doing today, what we want this to be like tomorrow, as we said, we want this to be like in the West, where the pharmacist really is influencing the choice of the drug, the way it is administered, the way it is dosed, like you rightly said, before food, after food. Many anti-diabetic drugs, for example, you get a very optimal outcome if you give before food, but many people don't understand this. Yeah, I keep insisting so much when I prescribe that you need to, but if the pharmacist were to support and every time reiterate that, this particular drug you need to take before food and there's a reason for it, then it will really make a lot of difference. And these subtle differences could have significant clinical implications and could have impact on patient outcomes. Thank you, Professor.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Participants, anybody else wants to ask any question to Dr. Ammar? Okay. So there is one question which has come in the chat, sir. He says, what is the eligibility and what are the key skills needed for getting into medical affairs?
Yeah, so eligibility, as I said, typically, if you're looking at a medical advisor role, that's sort of open more to physicians and MD pharmacologists. That's the current state of affairs, may change. As I said, it is moving towards that direction. Now, what skills? I think primarily it's about, one, the knowledge, the scientific knowledge, which is the most important, understanding of pharmacology, medicines, disease area, anatomy, physiology, so on and so forth, all of it. And then the second part is about knowing, having these basic skills of communication, for example. That's, I think, in this world, if you cannot communicate, you can't work anywhere. So you have to have that basic communication skills, presentation skills, and, as I said earlier, the right attitude, so that you can pick skills as you go along, because nobody is born with a ton of skills, or nobody enters the industry with a ton of skills. You acquire them over a period of time. Like, for example, my people management skills, unless I go and manage people, I can't own that skill, right? I need people in my team to be able to do people management. I need, and then people management is also different when it comes to, let's say, managing people whom you have authority over, which is your reportees, versus people who you influence, who could be a peer, who could be even your senior, right? He may be somebody who's holding a much higher position. Like, for example, I, as a medical director, I'll have to work with GMs, general managers. And when I talk to these GMs, the regional head, I'm like, I have to influence them. I can't be treating them like sales reps, right? I need to really be having that skill to be able to, be able to manage that bit, which I think you hone over a period of time. But if you have fundamental skills, good knowledge, and the right attitude, I think you can progress in any field that you choose to. Yeah.
Yes, sir, absolutely. So there is one question he asked, is there any good if someone does MS in pharmacology, would it have any additional benefits in getting into clinical research or medical affairs?
What was the course, Manoj?
MS pharmacology.
MS pharmacology. See, this again is not there in our country, right? It's typically something which is a US qualification. I would say if you look at India's perspective today, I think PharmD is a very good course if somebody wants to really pursue. Or one could even go, let's say if you're an MPharm, then you could do a PhD, which could also give you some leeway. I know in the past, there were some companies which had PhDs in pharmacy who were in medical affairs. I know a couple of them. Okay. Yeah, so there is that. So if you're a PhD, or at least you could get into medical writing, which could be a very critical area. You could be involved in some amount of drug designing and all of that stuff at the back end. Which could, I'm not talking about just operations, which is like the CRA job, but also doing something at the back end where you're influencing how the study is designed and all of that stuff. So that could be a possibility. But I think the critical part for me is not to go after just qualifications, get the right one, get the right amount of knowledge, and be open to learn, because learning should never stop. Particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, with the evolution that's happening, you can't be stagnant. You have to learn every day. And if you don't learn something, a new skill, a new piece of information every day, then this may not be the place for someone to be there, because it's not a stagnant sort of area. It's a very highly evolving and high-paced sort of entire pharmaceutical industry, I'm saying, whichever role you take up, irrespective. Yeah.
Absolutely, sir. Even in my experience, I have seen, people, MPharms and even PharmDs getting into product development, product management. And then from there, they've gone to medical affairs, medical writing, and they've gone to CROs and medical research and all of that. So the route is different. So once they get into any of this and then show their skills to the team, there is always a growth option in those respective fields. Thank you.
And there's another question that I see. There is this question around courses and certificates.
Yeah.
I don't want to recommend any, because the point is, I think the critical thing is, does the course meet your need? What do you want? If you most courses in clinical research, and I'll be very honest, I've been a faculty for these courses in the past. They are very theoretical. Nobody gives you hands-on experience. Okay, they're all very theoretical. If you want a good base and you want to start with theoretical knowledge, good, go ahead. Or do your own self-reading, go in, dirty your hands, you'll learn much more, because that's where the hands-on experience really, matters. That's where you can learn. If you work as a CRA, you'll master it well, if you have the right sort of attitude and the crave for learning. Whereas if you come with tons of degrees, and if you don't have the right sort of attitude, you may or may not be successful, right? So that's an important aspect, where you should have a very open mind, flexibility, and the ability to learn. I think that's most critical.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So one question is from participant. They say, opportunities for freshers in clinical research in Dubai. How to apply or enter to Dubai market? Good question. So the market just remember this important insight that I want to share. I think I mentioned this to Manoj at some point of time earlier in one of the conversations, that these markets in the Middle East are very small relative to India, very, very small. Okay, so there may be 2 CROs, there may be 10 pharmaceutical companies which may be having some, presence here. So it's not a very large pool. Okay, so therefore the opportunities are limited. And then the requirements are very steep, because one of the things is, like, any pharmacy qualification or medical qualification for that matter as well are not recognized here. Okay, you need to write a different set of examinations to be qualified as a clinical pharmacist or to be qualified as a physician.
Okay, but despite you having whatever, you may be a DM in cardiology in India, but you need to come and write an exam here to qualify for their licensing exam. That's one. And typically, the other bit, which is a bit prevalent also, is twofold. One is either you, on the medical side, they need a Western qualification. So if you're an FRCP or if you have an MD from the US, a fellowship from the US, that carries a lot more weight. Okay. The other bit is there's also a bit of a language barrier, which is around, Arabic. There is a flow of lot of people from Egypt who come with a lot of these qualifications, PharmDs, Masters in Pharmacy, and even MD and so on, who come in and they have a higher chance because they understand the local dynamics, because the dynamics are a bit different, and they understand the healthcare environment and they understand the language, in addition to bringing those qualifications that are basically needed. So it's a bit of a tough competition. It's a small market. Yeah. But I'm not dissuading you. If you want to really pursue it, be patient. You may get there sometime, if you put a lot of effort.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. Thank you. So another most burning question of today is, last 2.5 years, we have seen a lot of digitalization in every field. Pharmaceuticals are no exception. And, most of the pharmaceutical companies who stayed away from digitalization, they just took to digitalization like never before. And many of them, they have gone to the next level of, digital marketing and digitalization. How do you think or suggest artificial intelligence has affected clinical research and digitalization?
It's a very, very good question, very relevant, but it's a topic by itself. So artificial intelligence could find application everywhere. Okay, I went through a very, very simple course that was running on artificial intelligence, and machine learning and all of that, and their application in medical affairs. There's a significant amount of application in medical information, in backend analyzing data and looking at safety trends, for example, or doing a lot of medical information responses based on what's the response. If you put a algorithm, you could get a response which is like without a person being on the other side, you still get your question to your answer, which could be a query on a drug or whatever else. So there is, and even in clinical research, if you look at, if you read my article which I've written, that how COVID has been a catalyst to digital transformation. This got published 2 months ago in Pharma Outlook magazine, which is a global magazine. It's clear that there is a huge role. There's a huge role for these technologies, and pharma traditionally was a bit slow relative to other industries. If you compare with other industries, other sectors, but there is no choice, as Manoj said, and companies have really stepped up. So what was like sitting as a long-term plan is now crunched into a 1-year plan or a 2-year plan. So it was like a long-term budget. Okay, over 5 years we'll spend $1 million, but then now it's no, not 5 years. In the next 6 months we will spend $1 million because we want this technology to be with us, because without which you can't survive. Particularly in this day and age where there is so much evolution on the technology side. And in every aspect, whether you take research, you take medical affairs, you take operations, you take any aspect of the industry, manufacturing, everywhere there is. And there is also something which by itself is a big topic, is digital medicine. Medicine itself could be digital, right? So how do you monitor like dosing? How do you monitor whether the patient has taken or not? What kind of reminders you can give to the patient? How could you link that medicine to something which can give you a whole bunch of data through an app or whatever else that the patient has? So it's enormous. Actually, it's very, very wide as a topic by itself.
Absolutely, sir. I think there are a lot of companies, even in Bangalore, who are working on patient compliance and adherence aspects. They're coming up with a lot of mobile apps and web portals. And even there are PharmDs who are assisting these companies as prescription readers and medicine consultants. So huge scopes out there, definitely, for sure. Thank you so much for that answer, sir. Participants, would you like to ask any question with Dr. Ammar? This is a golden chance for you. getting him on online had been very difficult. He's a very busy professional. So you can just unmute yourself and ask if you have anything to ask, Dr. Ammar. Okay, I think there is no other question from the participants. So I would request your article and I'll share with all the people who have joined us today. And I would like to thank everyone who have taken their time to join us. Special thanks to Dr. Ammar for taking time for us on his busy schedule and sharing his knowledge with our participants. Dr. Hari Kiran, you have raised your hand. Would you like to ask something?
Yes, sir. So I have a follow-up question what you have asked. So in this digital world, we have basically, like due to COVID, there was complete digitalization of each and everything into the healthcare system also. So my question is, so what would be the skills or else what would be the right process to just equip or else to go in flow with that change in the current scenario?
Yeah, good question. Again, it needs a very elaborate discussion, I believe. But just to touch upon, I think the key is to be on the lookout. Key is to be curious to learn. I think curiosity to look out and see if there are technologies which could influence and what technologies are coming in. So you keep an open mind, try to learn, reach out to experts. One simple thing, even telemedicine has changed everything, right? For a physician, for a patient, but also for pharmacists. So there's so many nuances to which could be extremely critical. So I think the key for me is to look out, to kind of be curious, to be looking out for these technologies and learn on the go, because there's no way because today one technology which is relevant becomes obsolete tomorrow. It's very high paced, very, very high paced,
Absolutely.
So therefore, I think it's about just keeping your eyes and ears open and trying to learn, because there's nothing which is static. It's all very, very dynamic, extremely dynamic in a way. Yeah. Unimaginable pace in a way. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So I always say this, reimagine, rethink everything. Okay. Everything, healthcare or whatever, has to be reimagined and rethought, because that's the way to go. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, sir. Participants, anybody else wants to ask any question with Dr. Ammar? We have already overshot the time. It's already 1.5 hours. Okay, fine, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ammar. And with your permission, I would like to close the session until we meet next time again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a great day ahead. Thank you. Thank you all.